just said, if you've got kids, you police your kids. Otherwise, just shut up and trust the library system, the school system. Let them decide for your community. I completely, totally reject that. I don't have any kids, should I shut up? I pay taxes. When you have a public library and you have a board, somebody decides what books to go in or what not to go in, lend your voice to the cause. It's okay to speak out for your community. Cameron, you have an advocacy group in Texas, right?
That is correct.
And you have every right to do that. You can advocate for your point of view, and somebody in Texas has to decide who wins. But never shut up. Never be quiet. My point is, the theory of this case is parents have a very limited role in life. Apparently, taxpayers have a very limited role in this area. You're paying money to run these libraries. I mean, you're getting money from taxpayers. They should speak up. Ms. Knox, you said, is it unconstitutional for a parent to go to a school board or a public library and complain?
Thank you for giving me the chance to respond. Actually, almost all libraries have in their policies something called a request for reconsideration that allows parents or interested community members to object or say what they would like to have changed in a library collection. I think what's important to remember is that this is a collective decision. It's not just one person who gets to say what is in a library collection.
I'm not arguing with you. Somebody has to decide. But the point is the individual here, the individual taxpayer, the individual parent. There's an effort in this country to shut you up. Ms. Neely, are you going to shut up?
We will absolutely not shut up. I am here on behalf of more than 10,000 members of Parents Defending Education who want to have a voice in their children's education. Yet they, every time they speak up, are mocked, are shamed, are intimidated and silenced and bullied by elected officials and community members who do not want them to speak up, who are told that they are book burners, who are ashamed of that. And you know what? We will not stop, because after COVID, we had a window into what our children were learning or were not learning, and we were disappointed by that. So parents have not stopped, and they will not stop advocating for their children, because the gatekeepers, be it the teachers' unions or anyone else, has shown that they do not have our children's best interest at heart. They have their money and their power structure at heart at the end of the day.
Mr. Eaton, is it your testimony there's an organized effort in this country to push ideas, books, literature, through the public school system and libraries that has a very strong political agenda behind it? Is that what you're telling us?
I think it's pretty clear that that is what is going on, yes, sir.
Yeah, and if you don't see that, you're blind. You know, in Florida, Ron DeSantis did something you may not like, Mr. Chairman. In Illinois, you do it a different way. But Governor DeSantis decided he would step in and stop what he thought was abusive from his point of view. My point about this hearing is there's no roll up here for any of us. Illinois, you do it the way you want. Florida, you do it the way you want. Each school library, you'll decide. But the day that a parent, a concerned citizen, can't come forward and say, I object, without being humiliated, is a bad day for America. And there's nothing in the Constitution preventing everybody in this country from having a say to express yourself, to try to mold the community in a way that you think is better. And some of the things being pushed through this agenda are just, quite frankly, offensive.
I actually agree with Ranking Member Graham that I don't see much Congress can do. We will make no laws addressing this. But I do think it's important that we hold a committee like this to talk to these larger issues. We have a country right now that is based in the ideals of a commitment to one another. We weren't founded on sameness, same religion, same ethnicity. We were founded on big principles of democratic ideals. And in a diverse democracy, it is so necessary that we know each other, that we see each other, that we understand each other. That's what makes us stronger. And in many ways, our schools become areas, especially the ideals of public schools, where diverse people come together for an education. I am suspect of these books being taken out of libraries and schools because I started seeing books that had been there not just for years, but for decades, literally generations, 25, 30, 40-year-old books on shelves suddenly being taken off. Stunned that there were books that were important to me when I was growing up. My parents in 1969 had to fight a court case, had to go to do legal fights to get into the town I grew up in. We were the first black family ever to move in. They had to get a white couple that poses them to buy the home to move into the community. As I grew up, as my father used to call us, 4 raisins in a tub of sweet vanilla ice cream. And for me, finding certain books on my library shelf that not only gave me an affirmation, but a celebration that expanded my understanding of history, they were anchors to me, lifelines in some ways. And at a time that I was forming my self-concept and my sense of self-worth, these were the books that became the foundation of who I am. Some of the greatest works of American literature. And so when I see books by some of the greatest authors, I see Frederick Douglass there, being taken off the shelf, that's when I begin to worry that we're falling into this trap where we are failing to do what is necessary in a democracy, was to create public forums, educational pathways that engender empathy and understanding, that engender deep knowledge, that engender the kind of sentiment that is necessary for democratic democracies to exist. Not a culture of contempt for one another, but a deeper culture of understanding.
The issue really is the ability of a group of people, not even parents of students in schools, but a group of people or individuals who are able to go into a school district, a school board, in an effort to ban certain books. That is really the issue. And by any definition, I would consider that kind of effort to be an effort on book banning. And in fact, there are states that have already enacted legislation that makes it pretty easy to for anybody to go in and list a book as inappropriate and therefore removed until it goes through some sort of a review process. I'm specifically talking about Florida as an example. So, Professor Knox, you've done some research on why there is this effort to ban books. Can you tell me what sorts of books are usually get on these banned book lists?
Yeah, I would say that, thank you for the question. So the books that usually show up on banned books lists are books that we consider to be diverse. And these are basically books about anybody who is not white, heterosexual, male, cis, books that are about LGBTQIA people, about people of color. These sorts of books are the books that we see on the banned books list. And I do want to address the idea of banning books. So really what we often say is that these books are not banned, but they are challenged. Mm-hmm. So like Biden's border crisis, Banned Books Week has a nice alliterative ring to it, but in fact, we talk much more about challenging books. And what this is removing books from access to its intended audience. So that includes both age appropriateness, but also who did the author intend this book to be read by? That is an important part of thinking about what we call collection development in libraries. We consider all sorts of issues when books are put in a collection, not just issues of, do we agree with what is being put on the collection, but also how do we show many different viewpoints and ideas? When we look at the diverse books that...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I do understand that the target of a lot of these kinds of lists is books that depict diverse lifestyles, for example, if you want to call it that. And so, for example, one of the books that is being sought or challenged in Iowa is a book called Ho'anani Hula Warrior. This is a book about a child who doesn't see herself as a girl or a boy, but something in between. And this child dreams of leading the hula group, but everyone else thinks that only the boys should lead the hula group. And Native Hawaiians have traditionally recognized the existence of a third gender called mahu, and this book explores this and many other parts of Native Hawaiian culture. Yet this book could potentially be banned, as I mentioned, from a school district in Iowa for running afoul of a law against books for younger grades that deal with gender identity. Mr. Giannoulias, do you think, and also with Dr. Cox, do you think this book should be removed from school libraries?
Thank you, Senator. I personally do not, which goes again to the fundamental nature of our legislation, which is to allow librarians to make that decision. Okay. My guess is they would determine this book belongs in our libraries. The point I also want to make is, especially with regard to Hula Warrior, the goal of literature is to reflect back to the reader either the struggles that the reader is facing or to provide insight into struggles that the reader has never had to imagine. Books are a safe place for people who are struggling, who need help. And I would disagree with one of the opponents here today.
I do need to get to, sorry, and I don't even need the answer from Dr. Cox, but I do have another question for you. Is there any evidence that says that exposure to certain kinds of books leads to harm to a community? Does exposure to an LGBTQ plus book somehow cause harm to the reader? Is there any evidence to that effect?
Zero.
No, there is not. What I mentioned before is that books can be windows to learn about other people. So it might be that you have a friend who is thinking about their own gender identity and you want to know more. And reading a book like that one will help you understand what your friend is going through.
Mr. Chairman, I should think that there is more harm to a young person who thinks that he or she can be shot to death in a school than being exposed to certain kinds of subjects and books.
Let's take two books that have been much discussed. The first one is called All Boys Aren't Blue, and I will quote from it. I put some lube on and got him on his knees, and I began to slide into him from behind. I pulled out of him and kissed him while he masturbated. He asked me to turn over while he slipped a condom on himself. This was my ass, and I was struggling to imagine someone inside me. He got on top and slowly inserted himself into me. It was the worst pain I think I have ever felt in my life. Eventually, I felt a mix of pleasure with the pain. Close quote. All Boys Aren't Blue. The second is another much discussed book. I'm sure you're familiar with it. It's called Genderqueer. Okay? Let me read an excerpt from that. Quote, I got a new strap-on harness today. I can't wait to put it on you. It will fit my favorite dildo perfectly. You're going to look so hot. I can't wait to have your cock in my mouth. I'm going to give you the blowjob of your life. Then I want you inside of me. End quote. Now, Mr. Secretary, what are you asking us to do? Are you suggesting that only librarians should decide whether the two books that I just referenced should be available to kids? Is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay. Tell me what you're saying.
Well, first of all, there's this...
Don't give me a speech. Tell me what you're asking me to do.
With all due respect, Senator, the words you spoke are disturbing, especially coming out of your mouth is very disturbing. But I would also tell you that we're not advocating for kids to read porn, to Senator Booker's point.
What are you advocating for?
We are advocating for parents random parents not to have the ability, under the guise of keeping kids safe, to try and challenge the world view of every single manner on these issues.
You're getting conceptual game.
I'm not getting conceptual.
Well,
I'm saying
yes,
that
you are. Yes, you are. Because I want to know what you're recommending. It sounds to me like what some of you are saying, the librarians should decide who gets to see that book.
I'm saying when individual parents are allowed to make a decision of where that line is, and To Kill a Mockingbird, which involves a rape scene, should that book be pulled from our libraries? I think it becomes a slippery slope.
I think you ought to think about it a little bit more before you come here.
I've thought about,
Senator, you're going to propose something, you ought to be able, in 30 seconds, to be able to explain what you're asking us to do. Ms. Kelly, what do you understand? Well, let me skip you for a second. Mr. Cameron, tell me what you're proposing.
It's pronounced mix.
Mix? Is that how would you like me to refer to you?
Senator, your definition of sexual is synonymous with LGBTQ identity.
I'm not asking you that. I'm asking you to tell me you read those two excerpts.
Genderqueer.
Do you think that, are you asking that only librarians and not parents have any say in whether minors can read those books? Is that what you're saying?
Genderqueer has never been in my school library, so it's never been banned.
Well, suppose it was. Should it be up just to the librarian, or should parents have a say?
There should be facilitation of collaboration between students.
Should parents have a say?
Parents should be working with students and educators to be making decisions, because students are.
And who decides ultimately? The librarian, or do you take a vote, or who takes the vote?
Book review committees in the community in my school district.
You want a committee to decide?
There are committees.
Okay. Well, I'm asking you, how do we decide whether the two books that I just referenced should be available in the library? What would you, if you were running things, what would you do?
All Boys Aren't Blue, the scene you mentioned, is about sexual abuse.
I know what it's about.
It's not
What
erotic.
would you do in terms of making the books available? Would you say anybody can see them, or they have to be in a special session?
Students who do not read books like All Boys Aren't Blue cannot learn what is appropriate.
I understand that.
They cannot learn.
I understand, but none of you want to answer my question. You come here and you say censorship is bad, and of course it's bad. But the obvious response is, okay, you heard the books we're talking about. Okay, we're not talking about Catcher in the Rye. So tell me what you want, who gets to decide. And all I've heard is the librarians. And parents have nothing to do with it. And if that's your response, what planet did you just parachute in from?
Parents, Senator.
Or what country, more appropriately? This is not China.
Parents, Senator, for all due respect, parents absolutely have a say. My parents were immigrants, came to this country. We never checked out books without our parents seeing what books we were reading. They encouraged us to read books.
Mr. Secretary, I understand this is good for your politics back home.
It's got nothing to do with my politics. My bill is passed.
Of course it does.
My bill is
It has
passed.
everything to do with your politics.
I'm here to.
But you came here with a problem, and I'm trying to understand the solution, and you don't have one.
We solved the solution.
Other than to tell us that we don't agree with you, you're on the wrong. We'll be on the wrong side of history.
We solved the problem in Illinois. We fixed it because we.
Well, there are others you could work on.
Well, that's why
I'm
I'm
out
here
of
to help.
time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
To help other states make these decisions.